Ahoy! This is a Gilgamesh guide. This guide should hopefully give you a very significant advantage when starting out with Gilgamesh, because while his abilities seem simple enough, there are actually some tricks to him that I think make him much stronger than he would initially seem. Aside of those, we'll talk about the abilities, leveling order, builds, and a few other tips and tricks. His first ability, his one, is Sunforged Scimitar. If you look at the target of this ability, you actually have a relatively large AoE circle, and that can even hit multiple enemies. Initially, it just deals damage. But then you can see that your weapon lights up, and that's actually a buff to the weapon. So if you use the one, and then you keep hitting enemies, then you have this additional steroid on it. And what you can see here is that it deals quite a significant amount of damage, almost an extra half here, and it keeps refreshing for quite a while. The initial duration is 4 seconds, and it can last up to an additional 7 seconds, so a total of 11 seconds, while the first rank has a 14 seconds cooldown. So you can have this up almost permanently, and once you level the ability, you can see that the cooldown here goes down to 10 seconds, so eventually reach a point where you can use it all the time. That of course implies hitting an enemy all the time. This ability also scales in its slow, so initially it just applies a little bit of a slow, but if you're a higher level, then the slow is quite significant. And keep in mind that this is still in a relatively large AoE, so this is most certainly something that I would consider noticeable when going into a team fight. In my opinion, it's very important to put this ability on instant cast, since that way you get a very quick attack cancel with this ability. If you put it on normal cast or on quick cast, it won't be nearly as fast, and the target is not that important. Usually you will be able to confirm that on your target anyways. His second ability is the Dropkick. The Dropkick will wind up very briefly. You can see this is the targeter for it, and this target actually shows while firing, and then it'll kick back an enemy, and if they hit a wall, then they get stunned. If they hit an enemy instead, they will also get stunned and also apply a stun to the enemy and stop wherever they hit the enemy. This only applies against enemy guards, but if they get hit by minions, the stun still gets applied to them. This ability also interacts with his ultimate, which we get to in a bit, and leveling increases the stun duration. What's important here is that I would also recommend instant casting, because if you charge the ability, as you can see here, the targeter shows up anyway, so it's not actually important for you to have it beforehand, and it'll only delay the kick a little bit, so there's not really any upside to it. Gilgamesh's third ability is Hero's Advance, which is an AoE leap ability, which deals damage to everyone in the landing circle and then amplifies your teammates with increased movement speed as well as lifesteal temporarily. So if I go to this minion wave here and I just jump in there and apply this AoE effect, then you'll see that I get a little bit of lifesteal, and this lifesteal scales with my own stats as well. More specifically, it scales with my protections. While it can be useful to know the exact circle radius at times, I would recommend putting this on instant cast as well, because for some reason it feels kind of janky when using it at a quick cast, while very quick when it's on instant cast, so I would suggest doing that because most of the time you'll hit the enemy anyways. And that brings us to his ultimate, Winds of Shamash. This is a massive AoE that I would recommend not putting on instant cast because you can actually move it different from like an Odin Cage, and it applies a slow to the enemy that increases when they get further towards the outside. It also applies damage while they're in the circle and an initial point of damage, and at the end it roots the enemy and cripples them and also deals extra damage to them. So there's a lot of AoE damage going on and a lot of AoE CC, but more importantly, this ability will knock enemies back when you attack them at the edge of the circle. So they will get kicked back towards the inner circle, which works a little bit better if you have some more attack speed, so it's easier to confirm the basic at the right point. If you use them too close to the inside of the circle, then they will actually not end up knocking the enemy back. So if I just put it here in the middle, it won't do anything, and then only at the very edge this might happen, and sometimes the enemy can just slip out in between. But what you can do in addition to that is use your 2. If you use your 2, it'll kick an enemy back into the middle of the area, and that has a little bit more range than the basic attack, so you're not reliant on the enemy being on the outer edge. A smart enemy may avoid going to the outer edge so that they don't get knocked out by your basics, but then you can still knock them back in with the 2. You just have to watch out that you don't slide too far away from them, as I did here. Learning to juggle enemies effectively in the ultimate is something that takes quite a bit of practice, especially if you're new to Gilgamesh, since you kind of have to get used to how exactly it works first. And if you can fully utilize it, then you can lock enemies down for a very long time and apply a lot more damage to them that way. Last but not least, we have his passive, which provides you with 2 free tier 1 items. The first one you can pick up once you hit level 5. It'll spawn randomly on the map, usually relatively close to you, but it can also spawn further away and can be quite risky. The second one you get when you get 3 kills or assists in a single team fight. If your inventory is full, then you get 500 gold instead. Keep in mind that sometimes it can be worth adjusting your build a little bit according to the items that you're getting. Now when it comes to his living order, there are quite a few things that complicate it. It depends a lot on if you want to focus on clear, or if you instead want to focus on early aggression. Because either of those is possible and it can significantly change your build. On level 1 I would suggest Sunforged Scimitar, since that gives you a little bit better early clear. If you are doing all the camps and everything, you can actually dropkick one harpy camp into the other, but I found that usually the clear was still a little bit better with Sunforged Scimitar, since it has a lot of base damage, and it also gives you that basic attack damage on the big minion on top of that, which is usually a little bit more useful. But then on level 2, I would definitely opt into dropkick so that you have some self-peel as well as aggression against the enemy laner, as well as a secondary clearing tool. And after that, it's super flexible already. Typically, I would get 1 point into Hero's Advance just to be able to use my escape when I need it, and also for the extra damage if I want it on the wave. And then after that, you can completely freely opt into either Sunforged Scimitar or dropkick. The reason is that both provide great benefits in their own right. If you're looking for early boxing, then you're probably looking for dropkick, because dropkick provides you with more extra damage. If you land an enemy kick into the wall, then it'll increase your damage by 90 per rank, which is quite a lot, and it'll increase the stun duration by 0.1 seconds, which is not a lot. Not so much if you just get the normal bonus damage, which is probably more frequent, but for aggressive playstyles, this is what you would want to do. You obviously want to have a point into your ultimate, and then afterwards you would try and max out dropkick whenever you can, and otherwise opt into the 1. And possibly even max out dropkick before you put a point into the ult here. The other option is to put the point in level 4 into Sunforged Scimitar. This will increase your slow, which means that it's a little bit easier to chase down an enemy, and it'll also give you shorter cooldown on the 1, meaning you can use it very frequently, either in the jungle or in lane. It works for both, for very quick clear, because this can actually hit a full wave. Then you would do the same thing, and you would max out the 1 here whenever you can, otherwise go to dropkick. And after that, your choice is completely open. So you'd either max out like this and just get your 1 and 2 max out first, or you could max the ultimate along with it. The ultimate gets a pretty significant damage and slow increase, but I know that in certain matchups it's just not that useful to max it, because it's not going to be your primary damage or poke or anything. And if the enemy gets out with a relic, sometimes it just feels very wasted to even put the points into it. And you could have done more damage with your 1 and 2. Then obviously you have the other option here, which is Hero's Advance, which I do like maxing over the ultimate sometimes, again depending on the matchup, because it provides your team with so much extra movement speed, and I think this extra movement speed can be very beneficial. But otherwise, obviously, there's always the option to max out the ult here and just put the points into Hero's Advance whenever it fits. Really very flexible in a good way though. And speaking of flexible, build-wise, he may be the most flexible character in the game right now. This guy can literally almost not build wrong, because he works very well with power-focused builds due to the AoE damage of his ultimate, that's a large area denial, as well as the burst of his 2, but he also works very well with basic attack-focused builds due to his 1. And his other abilities also provide sufficient lockdown and follow-up to make the 1 work. So, here are some examples of what you could build, but really anything goes. This would, for example, be an ability-focused jungle build with still a little bit of attack speed in there to get a little bit of those basic attacks from the 1 in. So you see a Ninja Tabby here and a Crusher, and I would suggest Ninja Tabby on him most of the time, because the benefit of having a little bit of attack speed on him is great, even if the rest of your build is not focused on attack speed. Here would be a more attack speed focused build that would work very well as well. That would just give you a little bit more boxing potential, but still provide you with enough power to also get damage off of your abilities. And here would be a crit option that actually works on him pretty well as well. On the solo side, things are obviously a little bit different, because solo is all about counter building. So you have to learn what counter items are good, you have to figure out when you need anti-heal and so on. But let's just say we are in a physical matchup and we aren't really reliant on anything specific to counter the enemy, and we want to build animosity because I know that's what everyone wants to build. Then this, for example, would be a build that should work pretty decently, making a lot of use of the power scaling early, but also having some attack speed for the 1 from Ninja Tabby initially, and then getting more attack speed from Talisman of Energy, which I think is one of the best items for him in solo. If you need any magical defense, you should be building this item as long as you don't need anti-heal, because it provides you with extra movement speed to position better as well as that attack speed. The sledge is just a nice mix of stats that also gives you some extra health, which works very well with animosity and with his 1 as well, and then you add animosity for that damage increase as soon as you hit level 17. But I will say this, I think people are a little bit too hard focused on animosity for solo Gilgamesh. I think that animosity is a great item for him that synergizes well with his 1, but it doesn't mean that's all you have to build every single game. Sometimes you just need counter options, sometimes you need more survivability in other ways, more defense, or you need to counter healing more, and then there are a lot of flex options in solo if you don't go in as starter at level 1. He can also work pretty well with Bluestone Pendant, which allows him to have a much more healthy laning phase, I would say, since I find that his early game is not necessarily always as great as it seems, and he definitely has some matchups in solo that may give him a very hard time. So animosity is great, but keep your options open, especially Bluestone is one that is very strong at the moment. When it comes to relics in jungle, you want Blink and Beats in most of your games. I initially thought that Blink might not be good on him because of his 3, but we'll explain in just a second why you actually want to have it. In solo, you might have to go into teleport, especially if you're doing the tier 2 boot start, and other than that, the relic really depends on what your matchup needs. You might need a Sunder, you might need a Shell, you might need a Sprint, really very open there as well. It is definitely preferable to get Blink here as well, because it can position you much better in order to kick enemies back into your team. But I said this guide would include something that will significantly improve your Gilgamesh as a new player. Something that I see many players overlook and that I initially overlooked is that his ultimate is not dependent on just basic attacks in his 2, but on his entire kit. Every single ability that you use during the ultimate can proc the knockback, and that makes for a very interesting combo. So, if you blink in on an enemy, they may use their escape. This is all good because in that case, you would normally just jump after them. What you can do instead is use your ultimate before you jump after them. Let me show you what this looks like right here. So what you just saw there is that the enemy Odin was actually locked into my ultimate for the entire duration. I dropped my ultimate so that he would be close to the edge of it, and then used my 3 to proc the first knockback immediately, and then my other abilities to keep him in the circle. So I basically didn't rely on my basic attacks at all. I didn't rely on attack speed either. I could have gone full ability focused, and it would have still been the same outcome. This not only means that you can lock down a single target very effectively, but also that you can lock down multiple targets quite well. Let me show you that here as well. I use my ultimate so that they're both in the circle, and then I just leave in and it procs the knockback, and they walk out, press my 1, and they get knocked back again, I press the 2, and I can definitely keep one of the targets in the circle for the entire time. This even works when the enemy has a little bit more movement speed. You just have to time it right, and that takes a fair amount of practice and is much more mechanically challenging than the rest of his kit, so this is something you need to get used to. But it allows you to hard engage with Blink and force the enemy's escape and then still lock them down for a very long time unless they have Aegis or Beats that they can pull to get out of the lockdown. Holding onto your abilities in order to get this combo off can be very effective, and it may change how you engage in a fight quite often. I hope this will help you out with playing this character, because I think once you figure him out, he is super fun to play. Click like and subscribe, or I will go to my garage, hide. Thanks to my patrons for making this video possible. That includes That Nick Walker, Donald Dryden, Melancholy Ganger, Dwayne Brennan, Lanta25 Green, Zed the Undead, Nevitz Jr., Rawas, and everyone else listed here.